Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on this Thursday afternoon. My name is Jonah, and I'm here with Discover. And today we have Jay, who is going to be talking to us about podcasting. But before we get into it real quick, please hop in the comments. Let us know if you can hear and see us. Jay, if you can give just a little wave and a hello so we can double check your audio and video.
Hello, everybody. How do I sound? Let us know in the comments how I sound. Also, thank you for being here. Would love to hear where you're viewing from. What do we got? Who do we got?
Where are you from? Where you're tuning in from, maybe how you heard about Jay, how you heard about Discover. We love hearing all of those things. And just to set a couple expectations while people are popping in there, if Jay is moving through anything too quick, not too quick, but quickly, because I know he has a lot of information to give us today, don't fret, or if you have to get up away from the computer, don't worry. There will be a replay available on the YouTube page within 24 hours on the Discover page, and we will also email those links to you along with the course offer after the event. So don't worry, all of this will be available later. We're getting some people. Memory is tuning in from Canada. Thank you so much for joining us. Yeah. And it looks like everyone can hear and see us all right. So I'm going to give a proper introduction. We have Jay Clouse here today, and he is going to be teaching us how to make your podcast stand out with storytelling. And we can plan on learning. He will cover the small improvements you can make as an indie podcaster to produce a standout show using narrative storytelling. A little background, Jay is the host of Creative Elements and Upside. And Jay, I don't want to take any more time because I know you got a lot to throw at us, so I'm going to hand it over to you.
Amazing. Well, Jonah, I am excited to be here. I forgot to warn you, in Ohio it is raining. I'm in Columbus, Ohio. It's mostly stopped, but I did lose power about 15 minutes ago. If that happens, Jonah's going to sing and dance, and we'll get through it, and I'll reboot quickly.
Sounds good. All right, I'm going to get my dancing shoes while you do.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for joining. Excited to share this with you here today. As Jonah said, I'm the host of 2 podcasts currently, which is as much as it sounds. Upside is about 3 years old. We just hit episode number 200 this week on that show. In Creative Elements, I started a little less than a year and a half ago. It is at episode 75, and we are nearing 1 million downloads. We're at about 750,000 downloads all time on that show. And a lot of the reason why is because of storytelling and the way that I produce the show. So I will jump over to my PowerPoint here, kick things off. I want to help you, if you are a podcaster, attract more listeners to your podcast with narrative storytelling. And this will have a bit of a bent towards interview shows, but I'm going to make a conscious effort to also apply what I'm sharing here to solo shows. Hello to Karen in Switzerland. All right, let's dive into this. I'd also love to hear in the chat if you have a podcast already. Please let me know if you do have a podcast now or you do not have a podcast. I want to tailor this to the stage that you're at. Podcasting is awesome. Creative Elements is what I'm putting the most of my creative energy into right now. It's been featured on Stitcher, Pocket Cast, Castro. Now it's been featured on Apple Podcasts. Castbox, just about every podcast player out there except Spotify. I still got to get Spotify, but it is being featured in all these apps, which is awesome. It's given me the opportunity to talk to some of my creative heroes, people like Seth Godin, James Clear, Ollie Abdal, Matt Diavella, Vanessa Van Edwards, Kat Cocolette, Ash Amberger, Pat Flynn. Awesome opportunity to talk to these people and really create a great product out of it as well. As I shared to date, this is a screenshot from today. So all-time Creative Elements has generated 735,000 downloads, getting close to that 750 mark. Can't wait to cross the 1 million mark. I'm going to make some noise about it, which I'm very excited about. And the reason people like the show, and this is a screenshot from David Perel, who was a podcast guest, actually. After I published the episode, he shared this in his newsletter. He said, this interview is unlike most of the ones I've been on because it's so well edited. It's less like a traditional interview and more like an NPR show. We spoke about growing a Twitter audience, my time working as a television anchor, and how I failed at every institutional game I've ever played. Now, this is incredibly high praise that means a lot to me because I'm just one guy. I work with an audio engineer. I work with a couple of VAs, but not on the production or editing front. So to be told that the show is reaching NPR quality without having nearly the size of the NPR team, I think is a testament to some of the editing decisions that I make and the care I take in production. The show has gotten a lot of good reviews. It's still a perfect 5-star rating with more than 200 reviews on Apple Podcasts. So something seems to be going right. It's grown really quickly. I think it's because I take production quality really seriously. I take storytelling seriously. This is where I'm flexing my most creative muscles, and most of that comes in the way that I tell the stories of my guests. This is what a project file towards the end of an edit looks like. This does not include music. This is just voice elements in the show. And I share this just to show how many cuts I'm making. In the top track, that is just the interview file, which is already 2 voices edited into 1 voice. My audio engineer does that part for me. He mixes our voices together into 1 continuous track. Then I cut up that interview. The second track is the voiceover that I add. And the third track is what I call B-roll or external audio, things that I pull in to add some color and flavor to the episode to make it really stand out and not feel like, okay, this person recorded an interview, they just dropped that in with some music, maybe had a rambling intro, and that was it. I really try to take seriously the storytelling elements of this. This also isn't my first podcast, as I shared. Upside, been around for 3 years, 200 episodes, 185,000 downloads, so not as commercially successful as Creative Elements, but it's where I really cut my teeth and learned a lot about the medium. And some of my success is also due to being a part of a podcast network. The Podglomerate is the network that I am on, and I owe a lot to them in the early stages of helping me think through the format and the structure of my show, because I would have actually done a much lazier version of the show. And in fact, I did. It was the prototype episode of Creative Elements. I shared it with Jeff, the CEO of the Podglomerate, and he basically told me, this is okay, but it's not that good. It's not going to stand out, and here are some things you can do differently. And that's when I really started taking production more seriously. Podcasting is a lot of work, I'm not going to lie to you, especially if you want to have this level of production quality. So before I dive into the nitty-gritty of that production work, I want to talk a little bit about why you might want to consider starting a podcast, or if these are not interesting reasons to you, then maybe you shouldn't start a podcast. Number 1, it's the best networking hack that I've ever found. It's given me the ability to talk to guys like Seth Godin. Like, there's no way I'm going to get 45 minutes of Seth's time without a podcast, at least not until I create something else that's really interesting and makes him want to talk to me. It forces you to be a better speaker. I think of podcasting almost like Toastmasters, you know, the public speaking group that's been around for a long time, except you can talk to anybody on your podcast. You can talk about anything on your podcast. You can edit your podcast. You can listen to the recordings of your podcast. You can get way more reps, a lot more experience really quickly. So it gives you a really tight feedback loop, and you can actually edit what you've done to make it sound better and ready for public consumption. Podcasting also helps you create a habit of publishing. If you want to be a creator, if you want to be known for putting great work out into the world, you do need to get into a habit of flexing the muscle of publishing and getting things out there. Ideas are great. They're certainly something, but until ideas manifest into something that other people can interact with, they're not really useful, and the world won't reward you for them. And anything that you create, whether it's a podcast itself, whether it's a single podcast episode, whether it's a course or a blog post, anything you create and put out into the world is like making your own lottery ticket. You have no idea who can see that, who it can impact, who can take some sort of action that changes your life just because that thing you made hit them at the right time in their life. And then there's the case of, well, what if podcasting goes like really, really well? Then you have guys like Joe Rogan, the guy from Fear Factor. The guy from Fear Factor And this is dated information. It's like 2018. In 2018, the guy from Fear Factor had 11 times the reach as Howard Stern, like the biggest personality on radio, because of his podcast. I won't read through this, but the gist of this is, doing some math from 2018, at 200 million downloads per month and a low CPM of $18, he's making anywhere between $64 and $240 million per year in advertising revenue alone with his podcast. That's a lot of money. And it's possible because podcasting is getting more and more popular. More people are listening to podcasts than ever before. They listen to 7 per week on average if they are a podcast listener. There's a lot of potential in podcasting, even still to this day. But it's not a get-rich-quick scheme by any means. It does take time to put out the content, to build an audience, to get people to care about it. There are over 1 million active podcasts right now, which sounds like a lot of competition at first, but as a point of reference, there are more than 30 million YouTube channels. It's not an apples-to-apples comparison, but to me that says we're still pretty early days in terms of podcasting as a medium and the opportunity that you have as a creator. But if you're going to do this, you need to stand out because there are 1 million active shows. So what are you going to do that's different than everybody else doing an interview show that is just having a conversation, recording it, and uploading it without a lot of care outside of that? I think you should set your goal to be somebody's favorite podcast. This is the highest compliment that I receive as a creator, as a person. When somebody tells me that Creative Elements is their favorite podcast, that is what I live for, because that bar means that they're going to talk about it. And in podcasting, the most reliable way to grow still to this day is word of mouth and your listeners caring about it. And people care about and advocate for their favorite things. So you have to make a show that can be so good that it's somebody's actual favorite show. There are some side cases where production isn't the thing that stands out. You may identify a need in the marketplace for somebody that they're just really looking for a podcast to solve, to fit in their life, and production isn't where you need to stand out, but those are getting harder and harder to find. The format and the way you craft the show is the most reliable, in my opinion, way to make your show stand out. That's a pretty high bar. So some questions to ask yourself as you're beginning to create this show. What's the point? What is your goal in doing this podcast? Because you need to be honest with yourself. You need to make sure that you are being served in this way. Because if you don't reach your goal in creating this show, it's not going to be sustainable. You're going to give it up because it's not doing for you what you want it to do. Who is this show for? Who is listening to this show? How does it help them? What does it do for them? Is it already being done for them elsewhere? Let me start with these real quick. Who is this show for? What does it do for them? And is it being done elsewhere? This comes down to novelty and uniqueness and a reason for them to listen to your show in the first place. Because if you just want to interview experts about how to be awesome, you're competing with a ton of shows on that front. Like who is that show for? People who want to hear from experts? Well, okay, but that's being done elsewhere. They're going to listen to Tim Ferriss or Lewis Howes or somebody else at that level doing that type of interview. So you need to think more critically about what is the job to be done that somebody is hiring my podcast. This is an abstract way of thinking about it. But like, what is the purpose that this podcast solves for somebody listening to it? And how is that different? How is that helping them in a way that's different from what they are already able to do? You should also question, is my show about entertainment or education? In my opinion, it's easier to break through in education because it's easier to carve out a niche. With entertainment, if people are listening to a podcast to be entertained purely, that's a different budget of their time in the day. And it's the same bucket of time that Netflix is tapping into, that Facebook is tapping into. You're competing with the biggest companies in the world, not even to mention some of the biggest media personalities who also have entertainment podcasts. So the more you can tap into some sort of educational field, in my opinion, and still be entertaining in that, format and the delivery of your show, the better off you're going to be to make this a sustainable, profitable show if that's what you want. It's harder to compete with entertainers, guys like Conan O'Brien, Dax Shepard, who have a career in entertainment, and they decide they want to start a podcast. It's just hard to compete with that type of competition. Once you know what the point of your show is, then you need to start thinking about the format. Will you have a co-host? Will you interview guests? Will there be any specific recurring segments that people can look forward to? What is your target episode length? In the US, this is pre-pandemic, but it's probably true post-pandemic as well. The average commute time was around 27 minutes. That's why a lot of shows are around a half hour, because it makes sense to make a show that fits within people's commute. A lot of people listen at like 1.5 or 1.25 speed. So if you're around 35, 40 minutes, it's probably okay. But this is a consideration. How long should your show be? How often will you publish? What makes your show remarkable? I ask all these questions because when you see podcasts and when you think about starting a podcast, you probably have like some built-in assumptions that you can challenge. You don't need to have a co-host, or you could have a co-host. If you haven't thought about that possibility, think about it. You don't need to interview guests. You can do a solo show, and that can be compelling. Your episodes, they can be as short or as long as you want. Joe Rogan does 3-hour podcasts. That's a lot. That's pretty intense, pretty hard to come out of the gates with. But there's no reason you couldn't do 10-minute podcasts. A lot of people think that, okay, I need to do an hour-long podcast. I'm going to interview guests. I'm going to publish every week. I also don't think you should publish every week if that feels challenging to you. The reason to publish every week or more frequently is that the more frequently you publish, the more ads you can serve to listeners. If you publish every week and you have 2 ad spots in your show, that's 2 ads that you can serve every week. If you publish twice a week, now you can serve 4 ads. See, the frequency is mostly driven by revenue, more so than it is driven by this is what you need to do. In the beginning, if you don't have much of an audience, I recommend starting with a bi-weekly show. Do a show where you release every 2 weeks, because that gives you a week to produce the episode and a week then to promote the episode. And if you do get to a point where you're making money from the show and you want to make more money, ramp up production. And at that point, you probably have some resources to hire some help too. So if it feels like a lot to do weekly, just challenge that assumption. You don't have to do it weekly. I think in the future, we're going to see that more and more shorter podcasts become popular and win out. We saw when the New York Times released The Daily, a like sub 20-minute show, people love that because it's easy to slot into their day. It's easy to listen to every week and feel like they completed that thing. It's part of their ritual, their routine. And it's easier to make that part of their routine when it's a shorter time commitment. Okay, episode by episode here. It's not enough for your show, for the concept of the show to be remarkable. Your episodes themselves need to be remarkable. Like, yes, you need to think macro level. What is my show about? Why is that different than what's out there? But then you need to continue to deliver every episode a remarkable experience. It's not enough to have a great idea. You need to have a great product week after week. And to me, that starts with the concept of each episode. When I interview a guest, when I set up an episode, I pick an angle ahead of time. I literally just got off of an interview before this workshop with Steph Smith. She works at The Hustle. She does a lot of things. She blogs. She does her business as a side hustle. There are a lot of things I could pick out as things we could talk about, and you could quickly cover an hour of time and not get very deep on any specific thing. I advocate for each episode having a very specific concept that you want to explore in that episode and being kind of narrow. So with Steph, I want to talk about she builds and launches products on Gumroad and has had a lot of success doing so. So I wanted to get very specific into how does that process work? Because now that is an asset that anytime somebody talks about like, hey, do you know anyone who's selling on Gumroad that's doing it well? I can point them to that episode. And so can any of my listeners. So ask yourself when you're coming up with this angle, what does your listener care about to talk about from this person? Because you as the host, you may be really curious about this person for a lot of reasons, but you need to think about your listener and advocate for them and say, what is going to make the best experience for that person to learn about from this person and hone it in, narrow it in. This is an example of, and I'll go half at a time here. This is an example of a template that I've started using in Notion where I prepare for my interviews. This is an interview I did back in March with Alan Gannett, the author of The Creative Curve. I do research on their digital footprint, their website, their social media. Then I do some research on them that helps me prepare for the interview. You know, what they do, their bio, some interesting tidbits that I pull out of other interviews or articles written about them. Then I start to craft my list of questions. But what helps guide that question list is picking this goal, this angle of the episode. I want to, ahead of time, say, okay, with Alan, I want to focus this episode on how I can help my listener unblock themselves, unlock their own creativity based on what he's learned. And that goal then drives the questions that I ask because I have a finite amount of time, right? I have 60 minutes. So if I want to make the best use out of that time, getting more and more specific and deep on one topic is going to make a better episode. Your angle informs the questions that you ask, the order that you ask them, the follow-ups you ask when you start finding interesting rabbit holes that you can go down, and the audience's takeaway and experience generally. It also informs the production of the final episode and the way that you narratively craft this episode, which I'll get to here in a moment. Jonah, I'm going to take a drink of water here. Anything popping up in the chat that you want to talk about before we move on to production decisions?
I think we caught there's a big question just about how do you find the time to do these things if you're a busy person. So I don't know if you want to tackle that now or if that's Q&A worthy, because that's a bit of a lifestyle question in general if you're trying to be a podcaster. But
we can dive deeper in the Q&A, but I do have some high-level thoughts here for Nicolette. It's a great question. How do you find the time? You'll see in a future slide here that per episode, I put in 9 to 17 hours over the lifespan of that episode. That can span weeks because, you know, some of that's prep time, some of that's interview time, some of that's editing time, some of that's marketing time. So I'm not doing 9 to 17 hours on that episode each week, but I might be working on 2 episodes that week also to some degree. This is going to take as much time as you're willing to give it. You know, you have to set some boundaries for yourself. But if you're looking at this and you're saying, I don't have time to do this well, that might be a signal that I shouldn't do a podcast because it's not helpful to create a show that you can't do well, that won't help people, that you can't market, that won't get in front of people. It's just going to take time away from you and it's not giving you a benefit to your bottom line and it's not helping anyone else because it's not getting in front of them. So you do want to be thoughtful about your time and realistic about it. Judy asks, is Jay's course for beginners? Yes, it is, Judy.
Cheers. One, I'm curious, just real quick, we can get a little deeper in the Q&A, of course, but you can just contract out a lot of that editing and work. Sure. Is that something you recommend when you get started?
And I mentioned this in the course, I recommend hiring an audio engineer from day one because even if it's just help in mixing the show and making the audio that exists sound really good, they are more well equipped to do that and do that quickly. Mm-hmm. It would take me, not you, Jonah, because you are good at this. Okay. It would take me literal hours to do something that takes my audio engineer maybe 20 minutes because he has a template and he has a process. So if I think about how I value my time at hundreds of dollars per hour, I would rather pay an engineer good money to do it faster. And I recommend that to everybody. The upside, I don't touch editing decisions on that at all. We have a way of working. We know the format, and I don't do a whole lot of productive or creative production decisions around narrative. So that's pretty easy. Creative elements, where I'm doing a lot of voiceover, a lot of scripting, a lot of narration, that takes some more creative production decisions and more time on my front. That I could maybe hire and train more of a producer than an audio engineer, but that's a budgetary decision that I haven't made yet.
Cheers. Well, I'll let you get back into it, but yeah, good questions.
Araminta asked, what do you do if your guest does not have a very big digital footprint and there's not much to read up on them? This happens. And that, to me, is a signal that this might be a really good and interesting interview because there's not a lot about them out there. My go-to research for a guest is actually trying to find other interviews they've done because that helps me identify stories that I want to pull forward. It also helps me identify questions that always get asked so that I don't have to ask the same questions and it's a different interview. But people share a lot of information in audio because you can talk faster than you can write. So listening to other interviews is a great way to do it. And if there's not a lot of information about them, then you can rest assured that the listener doesn't have much information about them either. And you can be an advocate for them and listen and meet them where they are by asking some more introductory beginning questions of this guest because there's no context out there.
That's an awesome take. So I know everyone's always trying to get someone with a bigger following on their podcast, but from a narrative storytelling perspective, I love you find value in someone people don't know as well.
Totally.
That's awesome. Cool. Very cool.
All right. Production decisions. And this is where I spend a lot of my time as I was sharing. My audio engineer does take my raw interview files and mix them together into a great single interview track. But then I take that and do a lot of editing to it and add to it, augment it, move things around, because I believe your episode should be an experience. This is why we have intro music to a show at all. Like, you may start a podcast and think I need music because that's just what happens. But the reason we do that is because that is like a audio signal to the listener that they're entering your world, your experience, this thing that they've come to know and love and appreciate that you have crafted for them. And that should play through the entire thing, in my opinion. So let me talk a little bit about the anatomy of a show. And this is going to speak, again, a lot towards an interview show, but I'm gonna tailor this towards a solo show as well. For me, I like to start the show with what I call an opening clip. This is audio pulled from the interview that is interesting, that is like an immediate hook, almost like a trailer for the episode. And I like this to be less than 20 seconds. My sweet spot is about 12 to 15 seconds of good audio that gives people a taste of what we're going to talk about in this episode. Then I go into the opening theme. This is a global file that is a part of every episode, where it's the same music, it's the same voiceover from me. This is you entering the experience of creative elements. Then we have what is called an episodic intro. Episodic intro to me is a custom recorded introduction to this specific episode, where I said, in that opening theme, you'll have the welcome to Creative Elements, a show talking to artists about their art and creativity. I haven't read that line since recording it to be part of the episode because it's on every file. But the episodic intro is specific to this guest. Then you have some sort of transition, which I like to be music. Then you have the episodic middle, which is typically the guest interview. And I'll do this whole exercise again for a solo show here in a minute. But the episodic middle is where you have conversation with a guest if you have an interview. Then you have another transition out of the interview into what I call the episodic close, where maybe you have a recurring segment here of what you're doing in the close. Maybe it's just a quick recap about the interview. Maybe it's just telling people, hey, here's the next action I want you to take. Then you have closing theme music once again. So if you're doing a solo show, I think this format still holds up, but you might have more transitions. One of the formats that I like in solo shows is when somebody has like an outline of, hey, here are 5 ways to grow your Instagram. Like it's written as in like, I'm going to tell you 5 specific things, and it's all them. So the episodic intro is probably laying out like, why are we having this episode at all? Okay, now let's get into this episode. Then you have your transition. You get into the episodic middle, but you probably want to have a segment for each of those reasons where you say, okay, reason number 1 or method number 1, here's how you do it. Then you have a slight transition. If nothing else, then to just let the episode breathe. I just learned something. All right, reason number 2 or method number 2. And you do that through the life or through the whole outline of the episode. Then you get into the transition. You still have an episodic close where you have a conclusion or a wrap up or a call to action, and then a closing theme. If you have ads in your show, here are the typical ad spots that I use, that I recommend. You have a pre-roll ad, which is at the very, very beginning of the show. Post-roll is at the very, very end of the show. And then mid-roll is inside the episode itself. I have 2 mid-roll spots within my episodic middle, my interviews. You can do fewer. You can have 1. You don't have to do a pre-roll. You can do as few ads as you want. But if you're going to run ads, these are the spaces that I would consider. You can earn a lot more from pre-roll and mid-roll than you can in post-roll. Post-roll, not a lot of people listen to post-roll, I'll be honest. All of these sections should be cohesive and engaging. This looks like, a bunch of discrete segments, but all of it should be a narrative, cohesive experience. There are a few levers that you can play with for making sure that that is true, making sure that this episode, which consists of multiple spaces and segments, is in fact cohesive. One of those is narrative. This is literally, like the story you're telling. The entire thing is focused on this one story. The second way to make things cohesive is to really play and experiment with sound design. If you listen to a higher production show, you might notice that the show will heighten your emotions at times by the way they use sound in that episode. If you think about Serial, the narrative podcasts about the guy who is in prison and they're questioning whether he did the crime. When there were intense moments, they will play music that evokes an intense mood in you. You can manipulate and tell people, signal to people how they should be feeling with the audio, the story that's happening, by the sound underneath it. Voiceover is one of my favorite levers to play with, or specific lack thereof, but I like using voiceover because for me, I do an interview, but sometimes I don't ask questions in a way that makes me sound smart. Or sometimes when I talk to people that I've been following for a while, I fanboy a little bit and say, oh my gosh, I love the book that you wrote, or I love this thing. That doesn't need to be in the final product. What the listener wants to have is the most cohesive, condensed, economical, enjoyable experience from front to back. And sometimes you can make the experience better by cutting out the question that you said in the interview and instead re-recording some new voiceover where you make the transition from question A to question B even more smooth. Even if you took a right angle, you might be able to make that transition make more sense by filling in with a voiceover after the fact. I also love to show and not tell. So this manifests for my show in a really fun way. A lot of the creators I talk to have YouTube channels, they have podcasts that they've done, they've maybe done talks. They have audio and video assets that they own that they can give me permission to use, and they frequently mention them in the show. So if somebody tries to give an example of, okay, I'm talking to a YouTuber, and they say, yeah, my channel really started to take off after this video that I did reviewing the iPhone 7. At that point, I like to cut and then bring in audio from that specific video so that people can hear what this person is talking about. It makes for a more rich experience where the person doesn't have to tell you what they said in the video or what they did in the video. You can listen to it. And maybe after they listen to it, then you hear that person's commentary on the decisions that they made, because that just makes this whole thing a lot more immersive. Third-party audio is how I do that. Sometimes if they have a podcast, I'll bring in their audio from the podcast. If they have a YouTube channel, I'll bring in the audio from a YouTube channel. You do have to be careful here to make sure that you have the rights to use certain things, which is why I basically stick to things that are owned by the guest that they can give me explicit permission for. You certainly don't want to use copyrighted music as audio that you pull in without explicit permission from the artist or the label. That's a big way to get in trouble very quickly. So be careful. But if you find ways to do this, like this other person's content, it can be really, really powerful. Guest clips. This is kind of like the podcast audio that I'm talking about. If they have their own podcast, you can pull in audio from that. Oh, also, sorry, what I meant with this bullet point. What I love to do is take clips from the interview itself and pull that into the intro for the episode. And I'll talk more about that here in a second. So let's talk about narrative and ways to stand out. A lot of people, when they have an intro to their show, they'll kind of ramble into who this person is and maybe what's going on in their life. Could be 2 minutes, could be 8 minutes. If you listen to WTF with Mark Maron, he can ramble for like 15 minutes sometimes. That's not a strategy that most people can use because we're getting higher and higher standards for how we spend our time. And if we don't care about this thing you're rambling about, we're going to stop listening really, really quickly. I like to spend a lot of extra time in the episodic intro, scripting, and making this really, really great and really compelling. Because if somebody's going to listen to your episode, it's probably because they were hooked in the first few minutes. A lot of hosts will talk to an interview guest and say, so tell us about yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background. The guest is going to be humble. They are not going to brag about themselves and talk about all their accomplishments. And so the listener, if they don't get to hear that context, those accomplishments, the things that person has done, they won't know why they're listening. Why should I take this person seriously? And really impressive people might have really mundane examples or advice, which if we don't know that this person is interesting, we might not be interested by that mundaneness. But if it's someone we really know and respect, and they're telling us that their favorite thing to do is just wake up and have a coffee in the morning, that becomes more interesting by virtue of who they are and what we think about them. So contextually, the best thing you can do is script an intro ahead of time before the interview so that your listener knows why you are having this person on the show and what you're going to take away from it. That episodic intro is the best way to hook people into listening to the whole episode, and the more effort you put into it, the better off you'll be. I like to pull audio from the interview into that intro because it very quickly introduces you to the voice of the guest. Often I will start the interview talking about the guest's background, but not saying, tell me about your background. I'll dive into a specific part of their background, knowing that their answer is actually probably going to come in the intro as opposed to the interview itself. Because you can very quickly have this like show, not tell moment in the intro. Let's see if I can think of an example on the spot. I just interviewed a guy who has 2 million followers on TikTok. And his background is pretty different. And in fact, in the intro, I said he built a Twitter or a TikTok following of 2 million followers in just over a year. And his background isn't what you would expect. And instead of me telling you his background, I then cut in a piece of audio of him telling what he was doing before TikTok. Him saying that he was a physics professor at USC. And that in his role as a professor, he would spend hours a week performing. Way more interesting to pull his audio in telling that story, even if it's only 10 seconds of audio, than for me to say exactly the same thing. I like to pull audio from the guest's external sources into the intro, especially if they're on like YouTube or have a podcast or anything else that they create, if it works. Maybe they've given a speech that you can point to and say, yeah, this person spoke at this conference, and that's where they landed this opportunity, and you can pull audio from them talking at that conference because it was recorded. After the episodic intro, you have the transition into the episodic middle. A lot of people will start with their own question in that episodic middle. It's their own question, hey, tell us about this thing, and then the guest responds. I like to transition from my intro, directly into the guest's first response. Because 9 times out of 10, that response has enough context for people to understand what's going on, what we're jumping into. Usually because I will ask a question specifically about their background and say like, okay, so this physics professor, when did you get into teaching? And he'll say, I got into teaching, yada, yada, yada. You don't need me asking that. If you go straight into the interview and him saying, I got into teaching, yada, 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 you get it. You get where we're coming from, and it's more immediately engaging and immersive. As I shared a little bit ago, I like to script some of my voiceover to smooth out some of the narrative arc, because sometimes you're in an interview and you go from topic A to a completely different topic, and it feels like a jarring right turn to the listener, unless you cut in voiceover to say, okay, now that we've talked about A, I really wanted to zoom forward into the current time. And so I asked the guest why they're doing this thing now. You know, like follow my logic as to why I asked this next question by doing some voiceover. And remember, as you're crafting this whole episode, this whole experience, you want to stick to the angle that you defined ahead of time. You'll be tempted to go off course into wildly different rabbit holes, and maybe sometimes that's the right decision. But most of the time, it's best to use all of your time and prioritize that thing that you wanted to explore. As I shared, I probably put 9 to 17 hours per episode into the production, from sending an email to the guests to book them to releasing the show, which seems like a lot. I know it is a lot. I won't lie. But I wouldn't do it if I didn't love it. I really enjoy making this show. When people tell me that it's their favorite show, that goes so far, and it pushes me to take that extra hour, even though in the moment it may feel like a lot, to do the best work that I can. I saw a question from Nicolette in the chat. Where do you hire your audio engineer? I found mine through a referral, but he was referred to me by someone who found him on Upwork. And I've hired multiple people on Upwork since. We talk about this in podcasts like the pros, actually, the course. I interview my audio engineer a couple of times in that course for a couple of lessons. And we talk about how to find a good engineer, what to expect, how to write the job description, and how to filter for that person. But you can find them on Upwork, and you can find someone great there. Aha, I had the logo. Why didn't I just go to the logo? Oh, silly me. So if you enjoyed this and you want to learn a lot more about this, that is what podcasts like the pros is for. Someone asked if this is for beginners. This course will take you from seedling of an idea to fully produced, remarkable show that sounds really, really good. It goes into my entire production process. We talk about your ideation, the idea you're coming up with, how to make a commercially viable idea that will stand out to listeners and build an audience. We talk about audio quality, the gear that you need, how to get the best sound out of your gear, how to get the best sound out of your guest, how to set up your room acoustically. Hiring an audio engineer, I get into even the job description that I used. Then we go into interviewing, how I book guests, big name guests, people like Seth, people like James Clear, how to prepare for interviews. And then Module 5. Module 5 is the meaty one that people tell me just a couple of videos in Module 5 is worth the entire price of the course. The 5.7 editing and scripting lesson is 26 minutes. It's a screen capture of me doing step-by-step the decisions I make in editing the show to make it sound really great. It's literally a screen capture of GarageBand, me talking through all these decisions, but I do a deep dive on each and every one of the tools that helps me produce this show as a very, very small team. Airtable, Calendly, Squadcast, transcripts with Otter, hiring a VA for transcripts on Upwork, all of it. Then in Module 6, we get into marketing and distribution strategies so you can get in front of listeners. Module 7, I actually interview Jeff from the network, and we talk about advertising and sponsorship. We also talk about podcast networks. I bring in 3 guests in this course: the guy who runs a network that I am on, my audio engineer, and the audio engineer who made the custom music for Creative Elements. All of them are a part of this course, talking exactly about how we made it. It's 36 lessons. It's 5 hours. And it's an edited 5 hours. The same way that I take care in editing my podcast, I took a lot of care in editing this course. So even though it's long, each of these videos are exactly as long as they need to be. It is giving you everything you need, nothing more, nothing less, but a lot of detail. It's typically priced at $199. On Teachable Discover right now, it's on discount for the next 2 weeks for $160. I hate discounting my courses. Hate it, hate it, hate it. Don't like doing it. So you will not see a discount on this course because I think it should be priced twice as high as it is, honestly. If you're interested in podcasting, this is a screaming bargain. And I'm not trying to be not humble, but it's just, it'll get you there. It'll get you exactly what I've learned and what I've done for 3 years as a podcaster, but way, way faster. People give me incredible reviews saying it's amazing, the best course they've ever taken. Amazing creator and podcast host. His course changed my whole vision for 2021. Great stuff. No interest in starting a podcast, but I still couldn't help but binge the entire course already. This guy, I helped him launch it. Boris said the course is amazing. Dara said the videos for the podcasting course are fire, and she's on YouTube, so that means a lot. Top-notch quality. Get on his course, and yours will be too. Really high ratings of satisfaction from students. Here's the link. Jonah will be sharing it in the chat. You'll get it in a follow-up email as well, I'm sure. But please take us up on this. If you want to start a show, this will help you do it, and it will help you do it in a very cost-effective manner. In conclusion here, and then we'll get to some Q&A. Podcasting, incredible tool for networking, for publishing. If you take it seriously, it can even make you successful monetarily. Taking it seriously is a lot of work, and that work begins from the beginning, thinking about the concept of your show. So take your production quality seriously, lean into the narrative of each episode, and be quick to outsource the actual audio engineering. I encourage you, I almost beg you, in fact. And Jonah, I think we're ready for questions. Here are, if you want these slides for any reason, you can get them at workshops.jclouse.com/podcast. And I'd love to connect with you on the interwebs.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jay. I really appreciate the care you put. There's so many podcasts out there and the care you put into the storytelling aspect. And I know the interview model has been used so much, and I have clients and consistently see the Joe Rogan. Let's just, shoot at it for 3 hours.
3
and
hours.
Maybe it had its place, but I really appreciate something that's a little more care and production put into it. For everyone watching, we are about to launch into the Q&A. So feel free to start throwing questions in there for Jay. I did want to ask you a couple questions about your course.
Yeah.
First off, I think you're still being humble. The value of your course is quite ridiculous given what else is out there. So I've done a lot of searching as a podcast producer for what other people are doing and courses and what they offer. And I think you give an immense amount for what you're charging. So just to back you up there for everyone watching,
Thanks.
This is a killer deal. And from someone who clearly knows very much what they're doing and how to make a compelling story.
Thanks, man. That means a lot.
Yeah.
I think it's like the best work that I've done, especially in course format. I mean, every week I'm getting better at podcasting, and I like to think that's like the best creative work I'm doing. But I am really, really proud of this course, and I stand by it 1,000%.
Well, even just the amount of curriculum you're getting through there, that you're offering all of those elements in one course, I think is very commendable, and probably took a lot of time.
It took about a month. I pre-sold the course, and I promised it to be finished in a month, and so I did it in a month. But it was
You did that all in a month?
I did it in a month.
Was that a crazy month?
It was a crazy month.
That's-
I did well. I mean, I batch recorded and then I
Okay.
batch edited, and as you can guess, I take the edit really seriously, and it was a lot. 36 lessons, all of them edited. Come on.
That's incredible. Wow. Yeah, that is really incredible to pull off in a month. Wow. Just a couple specific questions. I think you may have mentioned, but just to clarify, I like asking people, is there like a community that is also part of the course as well?
There is
Or-
not, but I am hyper responsive to the comments in that course. I don't think you will find a comment in there that I did not reply to.
Awesome. Awesome. And then also just that is lifetime access for that, right?
That is correct. Yes.
Which also, I love the guy who says he's not interested in starting a podcast, but has binged the course and took it anyway. So lifetime access, if he ever decides he wants to, he has it all there.
That's right. That's right.
Cool. And I know maybe we can dive a little bit into again the question, and clearly Nicolette had just about time management and everything. I know you mentioned some things you can do. You can hire out an editor. It seems like you have a couple VAs working for you as well to help doing that stuff. I'm curious in the beginning, just as far as like how you come up with a budget to start a podcast if you're going to be doing these things, because I know from experience and clients' experience, you can set a budget
For sure.
and end up getting subpar quality contractors, or just it's hard to find out what anyone's worth because an audio engineer can be $20 an episode or $1,200 an episode. And so
For sure.
how do you go about doing that?
Well, you can really help yourself on the time front by getting ahead of production before you start releasing the show. Let me say that. If you haven't started the show and started releasing it yet, you can really do yourself a solid by producing many episodes before you start releasing it so that you can expand the amount of time that you can put into an episode. But for me, I've broken down the process, and this is all in the course, I've broken down the process into multiple stages of development, and you can batch those stages. So interview outreach could take a lot of time. I find that I have to psych myself up to even do it. So once I do psych myself up to do it and make those asks and make myself feel vulnerable to rejection, I'll send out 10,
Right.
And then all those interviews can be scheduled. And now I have a pipeline of 10 episodes that are in flight. As you record those interviews, now you can start batching the production of those episodes. If you get really excited and get into a zone, edit 2-3 episodes in a session, and now you just bought yourself 2 or 3 weeks by doing so. So each of these steps you'll learn like the time of day that you can do it most efficiently. You can lean into your energy, and you should batch each of those steps so that you're not trying to take an episode from beginning to end in one sitting. Instead, you are getting multiple episodes started in one sitting and getting multiple episodes edited in one sitting, so that you're building a pipeline and a backlog of content.
Cheers.
You
That's
mentioned
really
budget
solid.
as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
On the budget front, I have a few recommendations of different like sets of gear that you can purchase for gear itself in the course at different price points. At a base level, you can get a microphone for less than $200, sometimes like around $100. And that's really all you need. You can use free editing software, and if you want to do the time, $100, and you can do that. With if you want to hire outside help, we talk about this in the course as well. Finding audio engineers, their prices range, but you probably it's a world where you get what you pay for in a certain way, and I'm sure there's like a little bit of an upper limit. But I would budget, if you can, budget $50 per episode in engineering fees. And you'll get a great product. You really will. The VAs that I work with for transcripts and sometimes scheduling, those are very low-skilled tasks, and you can find help even in different countries for that for less than $10 an hour. You'll have to train that person, and you'll have to dedicate some time to helping them get up to speed, but it's not that expensive. So For me, all in, I'm probably putting in less than $100 per episode. It's probably about $85 per episode, even to this day. And some people may be saying, well, I want to put 4 episodes out per month. That's still almost $400. And yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And that's the cost of doing business, my friend. I mean, you can cut it down. You can cut where you want, but with a lot of help, especially in audio engineering, you get what you pay for.
Yeah. Well, and I'm curious, if you were to choose, if you're starting out and you have a limited budget, where would you say you have $200 a month? Where would you put that money first?
Audio engineering, 100%.
Cheers. I mean, as an audio engineer, I love you saying that, but I would have been happy with any answer. We got a question here from Araminta saying, what's your favorite way to get the word out there? This is an excellent question. We're in a good niche, but we struggle to reach more people in that niche. And if I can piggyback a little bit onto that too, I was going to ask about how you get on a podcast network.
Sure.
As well.
Everything's relationships. If you want to get on a podcast network, build a relationship with those networks and talk to them about what they're looking for in new shows. They're in the business of working with shows, so they will likely talk to you or at least pass you along to some information about what they're looking for in a show, because they're incentivized to work with more shows that fit their criteria. You just need to learn what their criteria is. In terms of favorite way to get the word out there, podcast discovery is still almost entirely driven by word of mouth. And so if you have listeners and they're not sharing, then you need to make the show better. You're not their favorite show. That's like the tough love, very honest answer. Because I could tell you that, okay, next, go into the communities of people that exist in this niche and exist there, and share your show there, and that might work. You'll get more listeners. But again, if they aren't sharing it, then it's not their favorite. You need to make the show better. So if you're finding a hard time growing the show from your initial audience, I think you need to think about, how do we make this a better product for that audience? But then, presuming it is a good enough product, spend time in the communities within that niche existing. Don't go in there and just start spamming it and hawking your stuff. But exist there and be helpful, and people will start to recognize you and know you. They'll start to come across the fact that you have a podcast. They'll listen to it. This is a long-term game. You don't start a podcast and build an audience overnight. You need to produce consistently over a period of time. You need to be out there talking about your show proudly for a period of time. And, magic will happen.
Yeah. Well, where do you typically go for those communities, without giving away any secrets? But is that a Facebook community you go to, Facebook groups or Discord, or where's your primary place where you think there's good people sharing and supporting?
Definitely can be. A lot of my guests have their own communities, and I might be a part of them, and I'll share them there. I'll share things there. Their community might be conversations that happen on Twitter with a small group of followers. And if I join those conversations, then I'm existing there, and they see in my bio that I host a podcast, and then they click to the podcast. There's always a trail back to it if you make a trail back to it. So, it could be Facebook groups. It could be Slack channels. Every industry, every area topic has some communities somewhere. You just have to find them, and you find them by talking to your listeners and asking them where they spend their time. Ask the people who are listening to it. It's so simple, but so many people I think aren't doing that, or wondering where else to turn. Also, I think we have to wrap up here a bit for time, Jay, but I appreciate so much, especially just your ability to lay out how important the narrative aspect is, and how important storytelling is, when it really is the heart of the art form in itself.
For everyone watching, please hop in the comments. Thank Jay for his time. Remember, there will be a replay available that'll be sent to you and the link for the course. Again, it's discounted just for a week, so take advantage of that while you can on an already very valuable course. And Jay, before we wrap up, I just wonder, do you have a last little parting words or last little bit of advice for people who want to start that podcasting journey but are on the fence about it?
Like I said, it's a long-term game. Your goal, I imagine, is building up a nice little audience for your show, whether it's because you want to sell sponsorship or not. It's going to take time. So the sooner you get started, the sooner that clock starts ticking and you start building that audience brick by brick.
Love it. Appreciate it. Well, thank you again, Jay. And for everyone watching, if you like videos like this, please like and subscribe to the Discover channel. We do our best to bring creators like Jay out here to offer fascinating and wise information. Jay, I hope you have a wonderful day. And everyone watching, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Jonah. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.